Good morning. Hopefully, you're watching this on Monday morning. My name is Mikhail, and welcome to Monday Morning Gasoline. And I have my guest here today is Kevin. Kevin, how are you doing today, man?
Doing great. Bright and early, 6:30 in the morning. I'm just kidding. We're
So,
recording this on Sunday.
absolutely, yeah. Full disclosure. Given that last week I did not wake up at 6:30, I decided not to risk it again. And also, Kevin does not like waking up at 6:30. So I think
Absolutely not.
from now on, I'm going to give guests the choice. As I will be up with you at 6:30 if that's what you want to do. If not, we're going to record it and we're going to give it to people tomorrow morning at 6:30.
Sounds good.
So
I won't be there.
I will be, but in spirit anyway. So Kevin, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to talk to you because over the last couple of years, you've talked to me about what Cloudflare is doing with their Edge stack and the ability to run like applications inside their Edge. You know, basically you doing serverless, and so you've created a really cool project with it. And I don't really know that many people who are experts in this as you are right now.
Yeah, they really should be paying me for all the plugging I've been doing, both their stock and their services. But
Well,
they're
I mean,
not. So this is like 100% just like I'm using it because I think it's sick.
yeah, and I remember when you first told me about it a year ago. So let's take a step back and
Okay.
let's talk about what Cloudflare is doing with their Edge stack.
Yeah. So it's a different take on serverless. I think most people are familiar with serverless in terms of like AWS, GCP, et cetera, like Lambda functions. These are containers that are spun up, um, on demand, and they'll scale out and stuff like that. And that's what it was really designed for, was scaling, horizontal scaling, right? But it was still kind of a complicated task, and you still had to build images and deploy images and stuff like that. Cloudflare workers, in particular, are kind of a different take. They run an isolated piece of code. In this particular case, JavaScript or I think Rust, and it's just basically running a code in thread. So this is actually the technology that they use in the V8 Chrome engine, and they're doing this on the edge. And so instead of spinning up a container, they're really just running your little code function in a JavaScript runtime. And the difference is like cold starts on AWS can go anywhere. I don't know what's the low end, maybe 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds on a cold start, up to seconds, like literally. And Azure
Yeah,
is,
2 3 seconds. Yeah.
yeah, and Azure is even worse than that, right? And GCP, great bottom end average range, but their upper end, like the extreme bad case of cold starts, can be just unbelievably bad. And Cloudflare workers instead are in the 20 milliseconds range. Like,
Wow.
and I've had them as like slow as maybe 100 milliseconds. Like that's the absolute slowest. So it makes serverless actually viable, because creating like a consumer app with, the cold start of 2 3 seconds, let's say that's a login, like an auth thing, or delivering an image, and your interface is slowly building up, like no way. So that's honestly kept me from doing serverless for years and doing traditional microservices like node servers and stuff like that.
Well, as a DevOps guy, like I am, I wring my hands with serverless. I'm like, I can't control that. I can't control pricing. What about scaling? What about, what about? And the reality is, serverless, we can do serverless now, whether it's containerized, whether it's, in AWS or GCP, but the kind of latency that you're talking about, that's what really got me excited. Like,
Yeah.
um, is there anything else that's serverless that has that kind of quick response time? I think the answer is no. And a lot of that I assume comes from the technology that they're using.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything yet. And so Dino, this is like the node built by one of the node authors. They're coming out with something that's like Cloudflare Workers as well. I think using the same technology. And it comes with limitations, but it's extremely, extremely fast.
So
And then
basically,
also
like
in terms of cheapness, it's a lot cheaper than Lambda functions. So it's about four. I think they're between 3 and 4 times cheaper.
wow. Well,
So
so
go ahead.
So I think that makes sense though, right? Because it has to do a lot less, right? Where a Lambda function has to spin up,
Sure.
and get deployed somewhere. These workers are literally moving around, tiny piece of JavaScript.
Yeah. And there's typically storage involved with like a traditional container, right? Because the containers aren't tiny. So they got to be housed somewhere. So it's probably all backed by EC2 instances, even if it's Azure somehow. I'm just kidding.
Unlikely.
And so they're paying for the infrastructure. And this is much lower requirements on the infra. So they can charge less. So for instance, Cloudflare Workers, there are currently 2 plans. One's free and then one's $5 a month. And then, past a certain number of requests and things like that, it starts to scale. But, it scales slowly enough that I think if you had a reasonable service that was not just unbelievably popular, at which point you're already making money anyway, hopefully, it's a non-issue.
So, how do they keep, I mean, I know you're not big into like the back end tech of it, but how, security seems like it would be a big question with this. How do they keep it separate? With containers, part of what buys, part of that spin up time is that isolated container. So you have, you can be separated from the other services by, an entire jail or, an entire process that's isolated to you. Whereas this
Sure.
runs, multiple. I assume it runs multiple processes, in the same V8 layer, right? Otherwise,
Yep.
How could it be so fast?
Yeah, I would recommend Googling not durable objects, Cloudflare Workers and isolates. Basically, it's a JavaScript function run in an isolate. So in the same way that JavaScript closures are completely protected from other JavaScript code running, like they can inject their own global variables, et cetera, and nothing else will ever see them. Nor can they see anything else that's written in a JavaScript closure.
Well, so we're going Stack Overflow today.
It took us roughly 5 minutes to get into Stack Overflow.
Yeah. So anyway, it's the same thing as just like, JavaScript running, that's running within a single function. Like it's not going to see something else that's running within their own single function.
So that sounds.
So it's basically non-shared memory.
So it sounds fast and also limiting, right? So you're.
Yep. Yeah. So the major limitations for anyone that's trying to get into Cloudflare Workers, that is familiar with like traditional like Lambda functions or whatever else, you can only run something that would more or less run in the browser. It's a service worker. So it truly is a service worker. So you're running a little fetch code that's taking your request and ultimately responding with some sort of response. And because of that, you can't access like file systems or anything that would involve the file system.
What about data stores? Can you throw a Mongo backend and do requests?
So Mongo, I couldn't get to work because it would require connecting to that MongoDB protocol. If you put a REST interface, which, you got to host that somewhere. If you put a REST interface in front of it, then you could communicate to that Mongo through that REST interface. But at that point, you're kind of defeating the purpose. I ended up using KV. You can also use Firebase and anything else that's, I know people have done that. Yeah. I use Cloudflare Key Value Store. And so Slick, for instance, is using KV. It's an inappropriate use of key value, in particular because it's write instantly, read soon everywhere. And that gets you into some pretty nasty race conditions where, like, if you've got 10 workers coming in, all trying to read a fast changing state, they're going to have 10 different versions of reality before they start executing on that state.
Man, it almost reminds me like etcd, right, is a key value store that was adopted to basically run all of Kubernetes, all of modern DevOps. So I wonder what kind of crazy things we could do with Cloudflare's key value store. And
it's sick. Like if you can deal with the synchronicity issues, because their limits, they're like basically they say, limitless number of keys, and the storage, like it's very affordable. The amount you can store in KV is pretty unbelievable. They're limitless keys. And I haven't done benchmarks to see, like, for instance, if you have, let's say, 1 billion keys in a KV store, like what they're
do? Yeah.
Well, looking up an individual one is like lightning fast. I think that would still be the case with a billion keys. It's the lists, right? Where you're trying to like list the number of keys that match a prefix or whatever. That's basically a scan across however many entries. And I would assume that would be kind of slow. And I haven't gotten a firm response.
You would have to almost like have several, you would have to have your own index lists that you would search that would then limit, that would then point to the entries. So you would have to have fast lists that are your indexes basically. So you would create indexes on top of this that would then index your core content.
And you end up having to like figure out like, so to do Slick, for instance, I had to design my own schemas because I'm obviously used to like either Mongo or traditional like relational databases, for instance. Yeah. And so I'm sitting here trying to like figure out how to wrangle stuff into a namespaced string as the value to imply or handle ownership, but also just really fast reads. Like ultimately, it's like I need to be able to read things instantly without scanning for things or joining a whole bunch of things. And so you end up putting a lot of thought into namespacing, which is it's pretty cool, but you could do a ton with it, to be honest. I mean, I got to the point where you'd add an entry in Slick and it would also create its own ownership file, for instance, which is kind of like a lock file.
So let's talk about what you've done in it. You want to show off Slick.af?
Sure.
So tell me about Slick.af as I'm logging into your site.
Sure. Okay. So background, I'm a photographer as well as a developer. And for many years, I've been really unhappy with like the current state of how to get my images up on the web in the laziest fashion possible. And, still like nice control, but also a beautiful experience. And so I built blog engine after blog engine to do this. Typically they were like node backed on Express servers and stuff like that. And one of the things they always ran into is, let's say you deployed some new code, let's say Heroku or something like that, right? With an Express server. And the first time someone hits that page, like your gallery, after it's been cold started, or I guess fresh started, it has none of those images. And so it says, okay, cool. Well, your database says you've got these 300 images. So I'm gonna go out to S3 buckets or wherever this thing's stored, download those, store them locally for the future requests, and serve them up. The problem is that web page is firing, let's say 300 requests all at once. And so they're all going to that node server and it's kind of choking up and serving up blood instead as it tries to keep up with all these requests that are slow and blocking. And so, of course, this became a huge, huge problem and it caused server crashes and stuff like that. So serverless was like the answer that I saw to this until I hit the cold start issues. And I was like, this is crap, right? I can't deal with this request taking 3 seconds to deliver. I'd rather it try to cough up blood and like, serve up something in like 15 seconds or whatever, or, 15, I don't know, a second. So Cloudflare handles this just fine. So like when I go to a gallery for the first time in Slick, it, let's say there's 100 requests coming in, it hits 100 workers. They each have one task, which is to get one image, either from the cache or from where it's originally stored on Dropbox, and then pull it back into the cache, and then it's done. And then the next request is through cache again. So it's just never has to do that hit again. But because of this, there is no bottleneck. And you don't have this like sort of, the server can only handle so many requests per second or in pipeline or whatever else. It's just one request handles one task and that's it. So Slick is basically a Dropbox backed image gallery because I use Dropbox. It's going to go to the other cloud storages as well. But my thought was this: I'm working on the computer or my phone or whatever else, and I'm working in Photoshop and I want to export a whole bunch of files and have them live on the web. So I don't have to go through someone's upload form.
I did that
through your Dropbox.
I threw up
some images.
Right. So when you sign up for Slick, it is going to create a folder in your Dropbox, like under apps, called Slick.af. Any images you dump there are seen by Slick and live in a collection gallery for you. And as you update those images or add or remove the images, Slick just updates. So you can basically manage it from your own hard drive and never even touch a website, and the images will still appear and disappear. And you go into the Slick to add content like titles, descriptions, etc. This week, or I guess this last week, Cloudflare released durable objects to an open beta. And durable objects are like Cloudflare Workers, except stateful. So you basically deploy a JavaScript class And a durable object is an instantiation of that class. So it will give itself a unique ID, and any talking to and from this particular like kind of object in space was guaranteed to be synchronous. So all requests will come in and be processed in order, et cetera. But it means that you don't have this sort of race condition. So for instance, I could have a gallery, like a collection gallery of items stored as a durable object. And when I operate on it, it's guaranteed to always be that correct state. Conversely, I do this in KV, and if I'm quickly writing files to like adding images to a gallery, and then at the same time, I'm also reading, hey, what's the current state of this gallery? They're going to have very different starting points, and that's a huge problem.
We just experienced this, by the way. So if you notice, so this is my gallery that I had just updated the theme for.
Yep.
And I had. Oops. Let me go back to index. So I just updated this theme, and for a second it did not update the theme. So now if I take this off and I save this change, I bet for a second, because it's using the KV store, it's going to take this page a minute to update, right? It's going to. Oh, no, it didn't. That was real quick. Wow.
It all depends. And so this is one of the caveats of deploying with workers. So like I can run my deploy command for my terminal, for instance, and it can be live on the web in like 2 seconds, or it can be live on the web, but my worker hasn't caught it. Hit refresh for a few times, and it'll take like maybe 15 seconds. So it really does depend on what worker is hitting it, because that worker may not have yet been updated.
Yeah, so like this worker still hasn't been updated with like when I changed this, it didn't capture the fact that I erased that. So I'm really looking forward to this redundant durable object. What about concurrency with durable objects? Like isn't the thing that makes work like the Cloudflare workers so fast and so low latency is the fact that they don't have that state? So doesn't durable object kind of undo that benefit and then still tie you down to a state that has to be maintained somewhere?
Sure. Yeah, it does. And they're pretty open about that, right? It's going to come at a tax. So number one, like for instance, if it's, let's say it's a cold start, right? They've put this thing to sleep. Well, this does also have physical storage that you can take advantage of. And so you can bootstrap it from that physical storage. The advantage is when it goes to sleep, it's located in one place in the world at any given time. And its storage is co-located with it, which means that it doesn't have to go back across the world to get that sort of starting seed to launch up. And it will be relocated based on requests and where they're coming in. So let's say it started off in Chicago, but all your traffic's coming from India. Well, that durable object will be moving to India to be close to where the requests are coming from. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be blocking requests. Like if you had, 100,000 writes in a second, for instance, like it's going through a bottleneck now. But you'd kind of run into that anyway, I feel like, with most storage issues.
Oh, you definitely.
If you don't need state, then you don't need a durable object, right? If you just need to like process requests as they come in, you just need a standard worker.
So durable objects take care of the data store for Cloudflare workers, and so for this low latency, so this is the data store you'd want to use because it sits next to it. It is aware of where the traffic is coming from, so.
Yep.
It is intelligent towards that and can shift the durable object around and make it available the best it can. So it sounds like it becomes a more full-featured, ecosystem at this point, right? Between workers and durable objects, you can now, you have a data store and you have the ability to run things, right?
I think the write instantly, read soon everywhere caveat of KV was a deal breaker for a lot of people, right? It's really powerful for reads. So for instance, Slick, I really wanted to make sure that the end user experience, like of just a user viewing a gallery, was always lightning fast. And so there's never a slow, I need to go and cache this stuff and join this or whatever. Like it's always reading from KV. That KV, while it may be slightly stale, is always going to be fast. The authors pay the price for that, right? They go in there and they hit refresh and they're like, oh wait, the change I just saved like 1 second ago and it said it was done. I hit refresh. Now it's refreshing from a different worker that hasn't yet seen that change. And so it goes back in time and says, here's what you wanted to see, right? And you're like, I could have sworn I hit save. And you hit refresh again and again and again for like 15 seconds, and suddenly presto, it's magically there because the worker has seen the right copy of KV. That's frustrating, of course. So durable objects means that when the users will still read from KV. I will absolutely use that for the cache layer. But authors, when they're logged in, they would be seeing from durable objects. That way they always see exactly what is. And yeah, it's slightly higher latency, but the end users, the viewers, never have to see that because they're going to read the cache layer. And so I would just recache as they change things in durable objects.
And Cloudflare has its own cache IP layer, right? So it has a way of
that is KV.
Caching. Okay, so
it's key value store, and they use it for like their workers sites, their Cloudflare pages, etc. Take heavy advantage of KV. So if you deploy a workers site using Wrangler sites or whatever, it stores all those fragments, all those CSS files, JS files, HTML files as just a key value. The key is the URL. The value is the content.
One thing that I saw the Cloudflare have that I have not really had a chance to research was using their Streams API to be able to, parse real-time data. And to me, that looks amazing for like everything from video processing, to, mainly just video processing. Maybe, I mean, audio as well, but.
If you're interested, I highly recommend jumping on their Discord. It's a very active Cloudflare Workers Discord, and they were even talking about streams this morning in terms of video processing. And I don't follow it because I don't work in streams, but I know people are working on it. And like I said, there's a lot, just really, really useful information there. You can ask questions in Discord, and people are really quick to respond.
Very cool stuff, man.
Kevin,
do you have anything else you want to talk about? Let the Monday Morning Gasoline people know.
Yeah, the other thing that durable objects can do, this is actually pretty sick. I thought that that serverless and sockets were basically an impossibility. Because how can you maintain a socket to something that like lives and dies like that? Durable objects will allow you to have sockets. So
how many sockets?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know. And durable objects have to be responsible for maintaining those lists of sockets and things like that. So there's a lot of work and a lot of tooling that's not there in durable objects currently. But it can do a lot of things that we previously thought were more or less impossible. And I will say this because I've just been playing with them like the last couple of days. They're a little weird. You talk to durable objects through Fetch API. So it's like you basically have to embed an API in the durable object. So I'm literally like Itty Router, which I use for my workers. I'm now embedding inside a durable object too, when I just thought it would be more like a JavaScript class that I could just sort of fire methods on. Not the case.
And Itty Router is a JavaScript router that you wrote, right?
Yep.
And let me see if I can pull this
really
up.
Inspired by Mehdi. He gave me the crazy proxy magic that allows it to be so tiny. Itty Router's around 460 byte router. It's like full featured middleware support, nested support, route params, all that sort of stuff. And then I use that with the Itty Router extras for like quality of life improvements.
You got 385 downloads this week, man. That's excellent. You're getting a lot of use.
Yeah, it's they're about to launch it as like the official like Cloudflare router template sort of thing. And so when that hits, it should go up.
You're going to be the official Cloudflare router for Cloudflare Workers?
Yeah, awesome. there's a PR in their code base for it that I did not write, so that's pretty exciting.
Hey man, congratulations! Yeah. That's awesome.
Thanks. There are a bunch of routers, and honestly, a lot of them are really great too. Mine just happens to be the smallest, which is its own random bragging rate. But I'm like, if you need more features, go elsewhere.
There's something to be said about creating a simple framework that people can take advantage of, and I think that's been my approach as well. Is like you make it general and simple, and then let people build out, as needed.
And that was the thought with Itty, because ultimately you can use Itty as the absurdly tiny core to a much more feature router or feature-rich router, and just use it for the routing under the hood. You could completely change the API that the developer interacts with. whilst,
awesome, man.
So yeah, that's pretty fun. Anyway, I use it all the time, like literally daily in Workers, and now obviously durable routers or durable objects as well. But
very cool. So yeah, people should check out Itty Router. And you know what? I think I've downloaded an early copy of this when you were messing with it last year, back when we.
It's changed a little bit. There have obviously been a few more eyes on it since then, which is good. When they were submitting the PR, it was spiking up to around 3,000 downloads a week.
Oh, wow.
I got pretty excited for a little bit, but it settled back down.
Oh, I see this. Yeah, that's still incredible, man. I'm sure it'll spike again, right, as soon as it goes live with Cloudflare.
Yeah, I'm excited. Like it makes you write short code, and I'm all about writing tiny human readable code.
All right, so it's almost time for us to go. I would like, as a tradition, the seventh, tradition as far as traditions go for a show that's happened 6 times before, as some kind of piece of motivation. Usually people have gone for books, but I know, can you talk about the motivation that you're going to give us?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you any motivation. So yeah, what I will say this, like, number one, I find that the dev community is super helpful, super friendly, etc. I actually follow people on Twitter. Twitter otherwise is kind of like a toxic cesspool, but for developers, I feel like it's pretty hugely supportive. Like some of the key authors are building up and supporting other key authors, like Max Stoiber from Styled Components, for instance, will be plugging other people's CSS and JS component libraries and stuff like that. So people are just like really supportive. Likewise, like the Cloudflare Workers Discord, like just tons of people that are like happy to share and collaborate, and they're not like sort of getting in this sort of turf wars of like, I've talked to other people that are writing their own routers, and there's not like you have a smaller router. It's just you're just talking about like nerd stuff together.
Competing for the smallest router.
Right. I'm just like, it's fine. Like, there's gonna be a lot of audience that's gonna want your router, not mine, because it's syntax they're familiar with, for instance.
So when you first told me that you were going to give us Twitter users as your motivation, I thought you were insane. But reality is, now that I think about it, I also I follow tech guys on Twitter. So like I Build the Cloud, who's our CTO, Darren. He was the chief architect at Rancher, and now he runs architecture at for Kubernetes architecture with us at SUSE. And then Alex Eccles, who's like huge in the Kubernetes community and builds all sorts of like tools that work with K3s and all our technologies. So without further ado, introduce our first. There we go. Our first Twitter account you're recommending.
Yeah, Dan Abramov. He's the author, pretty infamous author of Redux, which is one of the most largely used state management libraries for React still to this day. Although he probably does not recommend you use that anymore, and I certainly don't. But he's a brilliant developer and keynote speaker and everything else. I think he's one of the dudes that's been behind React hooks as well. But he's fantastic. He's a really good Twitter author to follow. A lot of great motivational stuff. Just seems like a really good human.
Excellent. I like his last post 41 minutes ago. They should rename philosophy to posting. It's pretty true nowadays. Who's number two?
Cassidoo. She's pretty good like developer meme content, which is always fantastic. Plus, she has like a newsletter, and I've really kind of started to use authors in that sort of newsletter style thing, but I use Twitter for the same thing. I don't have time to research all the trends, right? I'm too busy building a lot of times and tinkering my own stuff to really just be reading always and not like head down in code. And so I use authors, and they're like little tidbits of, hey, check out this library, or, oh, I'm really excited about this. And I'm like, well, I've never heard about that. So let me click on the link as a way to jumpstart my research.
All right. So this last one, Christian?
Yep. Signal Nerve. I discovered him honestly because he was asking about like the Itty Router, since he's part of like the Cloudflare team, and then part of like the PR to drag me into it on that Workers template. But I started looking at some of his content, and he's got like a YouTube channel with some really just great podcasts of like tutorials and introductions to random topics that are really cool, including like React Recoil, which I really haven't heard about in the last year, but he had a video last year about it that was maybe a little bit longer than last year because of COVID. that was really cool. And I was like, man, like this is just really good content. So I highly recommend him as well.
All right, I'll take a look. Thank you very much. And so, Kevin, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
And, it's been a lot of fun. I hope everyone enjoys it tomorrow morning, and we'll be sure to cut that little part out.
Yeah, and check out Workers. Workers are amazing. They're sick. Then look at the charts and graphs to compare like pricing and cold starts versus traditional things like AWS, and your mind will be blown. And if I never do like a live demo of like, API to deploy in like 3 seconds, happy to do that too.
So actually, I would love to do that for my meetup, but yeah, at some point, if you want to do that, because it was super amazing, right? As we started, your sign up was off, and within like 30 seconds, you were able to push an update, and it was back up. Whereas a CI pipeline for me would take like 10 minutes, to build a container, to put together the Helm package, and then to deploy the application. So it was pretty cool to see.
I get irritated whenever I hit my deploy command or whatever, and it takes me 10 seconds to refresh my API or my browser, and I'm still seeing stale content. Like I'm that spoiled now that 10 seconds seems like a deal breaker to me. So it kind of makes you a diva.
Well, Diva, you deserve it, man. You congrats on Itty Router and on Slick.af. Awesome projects,
cool.
And I look forward to using them and talking to you more.
Awesome.
Thanks, Kevin.
Appreciate it, Miguel.
Have a great day.